Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's action conversation on museums, libraries, and racial justice. My name is Adele Sholak. I am the Community Engagement Manager in the Center for Race and Gender Equity at YWCA Greater Pittsburgh. I've organized over 42 action conversations, and it is always such a pleasure when a community partner is willing to stand alongside YWCA and our mission of eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, dignity, and freedom for all. Um, it's been really a special pleasure working with Carnegie Museums and the team there, insofar as we share the mission of creating community and change. The panelists today and our moderator, their views don't necessarily reflect those of YWCA or our sponsors, but we welcome their expertise, their opinions, and passion for equity. I'd like to thank our sponsors that make Action Conversations possible. Action Conversations are sponsored by Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield and Allegheny Health Network. Thank you so much for your support over the years. Today, our moderator is Gina Winstead. She is the VP for Community and Culture at Carnegie Museums. Thank you so much, Gina, for joining us today. I'm very excited.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today, Adele, and really excited to have this conversation. I will start really briefly by giving a description of myself and my surroundings to make sure our conversation is friendly for attendees with low vision. I am a brown-skinned biracial Black millennial with short curly hair with bangs. I'm wearing a black blouse, and my pronouns are she, they, and I'm in my office with a small intersectional pride flag behind me and a University of Pittsburgh banner and a few other posters. Um, Thank you for letting me do that. I'm just really grateful to have the opportunity to work with the YWCA today. And we were really excited that you are interested in this topic and that you've given us this platform to have this conversation at this important time in history. Yesterday was National Day of Racial Healing, and the day before that was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So it feels like it makes perfect sense for us to keep the conversation going about honoring history accurately and advancing racial equity. Our museums, cultural centers, and libraries are vital tools and resources at our disposal to continue to advance a city and country that celebrates, honors, and respects a diverse history of people. It was a collaborative effort to make this happen. I'm honored that I could bring some friends with me today that I've worked with and alongside over the last 3+ years while in my role at the Carnegie Museums. Several of them have worked with me on one of my hallmark initiatives called Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh, Call for Art, an annual call for art that I co-founded in 2023 to invite artists to share with us their vision for an equitable and just Pittsburgh. This year's call was specifically seeking works that grapple with the question of how libraries, how museums, and how archives can serve as a conduit of education, storytelling, activism, and artistry. And so our panelists represent truly impressive collections and institutions that you're going to hear about today. So I will introduce them briefly, but we are joined by Charlene Fogy Barnett, the community archivist with the Charles Teeny Harris Archive here at Carnegie Museum of Art. We are also joined by Kimber Diana Jacobs, the curator and exhibitions manager at the August Wilson African American Cultural Center. We also have Dr. Deborah J. Rogers, who is the Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, as well as Dr. Deirdre M. Smith, curator of museum studies and art at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. She is also an assistant professor of history of art and architecture at the University of Pittsburgh. So we're going to get started by asking the panelists a few questions that we've already prepared in advance. And if you're following us on Zoom, please feel free to place your comments and questions for the panelists in the chat. And Facebook audience members should post their questions in the comments section too. And we will try to take some of those questions from the audience after we've gotten through our initial questions that highlight the issues. So let's get started. All right. So I am going to start by asking all of our panelists the same question. So this first question is for all of our panelists. Action conversations always start by inviting panelists to share their connections to the topic and to also introduce themselves a little bit more fully besides their titles. So we're especially interested in your personal connections to today's topic, but also your professional ones. So would each of you talk a little bit about yourselves? And as you start to talk, please provide a visual description of yourselves to make the conversation friendlier for our low vision audience members today. I'll go ahead and pitch this first one to you, Deirdre.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deirdre. I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation. As Gina mentioned, I am both a curator at Carnegie Museum of Natural History and a professor at University of Pittsburgh. I am a historian of art, culture, and museums from around the 1960s into the present. For a quick visual description, I am a white woman in my 30s with longish blonde hair and glasses. I'm wearing a dark blue striped shirt, and I'm sitting on a light green couch in front of a map. In terms of my personal and professional connections to this conversation, I want to acknowledge my position here as a person who identified as white. And so my relationships to both histories and ongoing legacies of racial injustice at museums, as well as efforts to repair them, are inherently, shaped by that. That being said, I believe really strongly that learning about and acknowledging these histories and current realities and working to create racially just and inclusive museums is an imperative of everyone in the profession and of society more broadly. And so I do attempt to use the platform that I am privileged to have as a scholar and educator and museum professional to work toward those things in the ways that I can. And most recently, I've been thinking about this a lot in relationship to an exhibition that I curated called We Humans at 70, Educating Pittsburgh on Race in the 1950s, that is on view until July in Hillman Library at University of Pittsburgh. The exhibit shares the history of an exhibit about race and racism that was organized by curators of anthropology at the Carnegie Museum in the 1950s. And with the exhibit, I want to encourage people to consider what the goals, but also flaws of this past effort at anti-racism by a museum have to teach people today, and especially to consider kind of thinking about what people in the future will think about the anti-racist work that we're doing right now and what that can kind of inspire. So I've been really fortunate to be having a lot of great conversations with people about those topics in particular recently.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. And it's been really fantastic to work with you while I've been here at the Carnegie Museums. And we always need strong allies, and I appreciate you being here today. So let's pop over to Deborah for a little deeper introduction to you and your work.
Thank you so much, Gina. My name is Deborah. I use she, her pronouns. In my background is a historic view of the Carnegie Library and Museum structure in Oakland. The bridge is in the foreground, and so it's one of my favorite backgrounds to use. I am an African-American woman, a happy feral Gen Xer, as the internet tends to say. I have curly hair, I'm wearing a white shirt, and I'm wearing my favorite jabot, which is a tie type structure around my neck that is very colorful and is just one of my favorite things to wear, actually. I am a Pittsburgher by background, and my mother for many years was a school librarian prior to coming to Pittsburgh. And so I grew up going to the Homewood and the Squirrel Hill branches primarily of Carnegie Library at Pittsburgh. And so it's such a joy to have the opportunity to serve as the Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility for Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. I think one of the things that brought me back to Pittsburgh to do this work is my own interest in reading as a way of getting to equity. And I don't necessarily mean that solely by reading words. In our history as African Americans, and particularly African American women, we have read all sorts of things and continue to read all sorts of things. So, for example, we can think about reading nature and the way that Harriet Tubman read nature as a way of leading folks to freedom. And so I have been very intrigued by reading as a technology, more broadly speaking, but also literally reading and literacy in a more narrow sense. So that's kind of the lens that I bring to my work. And I'm really excited to engage in this conversation about the ways in which we can continue to leverage libraries, particularly public libraries, as a means of continuing the work of equity in our community.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Sorry, not Deirdre. I also spent a lot of time in libraries. I grew up in McKeesport, and we were gifted the Carnegie Library of McKeesport. And so it's been really great to see the work that you're launching at the Carnegie Libraries of Pittsburgh. All right, how about we shoot this intro question over to Kimber?
Hello. Thanks, Sheena. Thanks, y'all. My name is Kimberly Jacobs. I am a Black woman, pronouns she, her. I'm wearing glasses and a dark top, and I am seated inside of an art gallery with a sculpture behind me, and it's an installation titled Flying Girls by Peju Tees with swirling birds, butterflies, and like 8 young girls with wings. And being inside this space today really grounds me and my purpose and beauty, being surrounded by that. It keeps me inspired. And I feel like, that's what reflects my work as a curator. And, for the personal connection, the work I do professionally and culturally, like really is grounded in my lived experience, my upbringing, where I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. My Southern accent will come out. And I feel a lot more comfortable when I can let my Southern accent hang deeply. So I beg your pardon. But yeah, I'm from Jackson, Mississippi, and I was raised in Black spaces that taught me to care, listen, to work smart and have fun. And, spaces like churches, libraries, museums, HBCUs in particular, were places that I always felt like, history is lived. It's not abstract. We live it out every day. And, working in a legacy institution like the August Wilson African American Cultural Center, really helps me live out that purpose, I feel.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And yes, please feel free. Do not feel the need to hide your Southern accent.
Thank you.
I let out my Yinzer accent now and then too. So, all right, well, I'm going to ask a little bit more direct questions to each of you, if you don't mind. But this first question is going to be for Deirdre. So, Deirdre, your work is truly amazing at the Carnegie Museums of Natural History, and it's been great to see how you operate these past 4 years. And with your training as an art historian, you've really built a thoughtful lens on how museums shape narrative. Our museum is over 130 years old, long before the civil rights protections, founded at a time when racial minorities, immigrants, women, and many others did not have the same rights or access to cultural institutions as they do today. So, from your vantage point, and as a curator and scholar, what are some inequitable practices you've seen historically embedded in museums as institutions? Secondly, how do you see these legacies showing up today, and what steps are you taking or are being taken, both by you and your colleagues at the Natural History Museum and across the field, to repair these harms and move the museum towards a more equitable future?
I would love to answer that question in a minute. I'm going to give the floor back to Charlene for a second to introduce herself.
Oh, I am so sorry, Charlene.
Oh, thank you, Deirdre.
Last but definitely not least,
I don't want to
got
leave.
ahead of
I don't want
myself.
people to forget the question that Gina just asked, though.
No, no, no. So, Charlene, please introduce yourself and your connection to this work and your role a little bit more.
Okay, hi everybody. That's why I was waving. I'm Charlene Fogarty Barnett. I'm the Charles Teeny Harris Archive Community Archivist at Carnegie Museum of Art. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a 68-year-old light-skinned medium brown skinned black woman with curly hair that's gray. I'm sitting in my one of my three children's former bedroom in my home office with a bamboo screen. And my role as a community archivist is to make sure that the Charles Teeny Harris Archive is relevant, is utilized, and is um, structured in a way that it can be helpful to a variety of information from anywhere from libraries and uh, publications to films and television, and most especially to historic content. Um, I'm very blessed to have been offered this opportunity. I grew up in Pittsburgh, PA, in the Hill District, and then moved to the other hill, Squirrel Hill. And when I graduated from Taylor Alderdice, I went to Los Angeles, and I was there for 25 years working in the television, film, and theater industry. My background is in theater arts. Um, when I came home, I read an article in the newspaper that said that the um, Carnegie Museum was looking for children photographed by Charles Teeny Harris. So I took the photos off my wall and stacks and stacks of them, and all our family history is embedded in the Harris Archive. And so, um, because I knew so many people in the Black community here, my parents were civil rights leaders here in the city. I was able to connect with many of the major kind of um, civil rights workers of that era because they were personal friends. And the museum then offered me the opportunity to work closely with the Black community in Pittsburgh and to be a conduit. So I represent the museum to the community. I represent the community to the museum. Thank you, Deirdre. I'll shut up now.
Thank you so much, Charlene, and I apologize. I know you know I love you, but I need everybody else to know how much I love you as well. Your work is so important to the Carnegie Museum of Art and to the greater Pittsburgh community. So thank you for that introduction. So Deirdre had a pretty long question. I don't know if y'all remember it, but I will try to summarize it briefly. Deirdre is a fantastic art historian, and with that lens, I'm really curious about her perspective on the historic nature of exclusion and racial justice within the museum's landscape and what type of work is happening now personally by her and her peers at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History and in the field.
Thank you. So yeah, the inequities in museums, as you say, really go back to their founding. And we can think about this both in terms of the collections and exhibits that museums are known for and share publicly, and the internal structures of who works at museums and how they operate philosophically, that's often less or maybe differently visible. And in the Western European models that so many museums are still shaped by today, even in the US, these institutions were staffed by and served to benefit white, wealthy, and male artists, scholars, visitors, patrons. And even in the case of a museum like the Carnegie, which was founded with the intention that it serve a diverse public of working class people in the city of Pittsburgh, racial injustice quickly appeared in the institution in terms of, for example, how the museum got its collections. And so, like many other natural history museums, the Carnegie benefited directly from and indirectly from colonial regimes and the ability of staff and patrons of the museum to visit and extract the cultural and natural heritage of Indigenous people from South America and Africa and around the world. And then to celebrate and justify that access by putting those materials on view for the public. And today, both art and natural history museums still serve primarily white audiences, are staffed by primarily white employees. But things are shifting and becoming increasingly diverse, and that's really fantastic. And in terms of what we at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History are doing, I want to acknowledge the impact that you've had, Gina, across the Carnegie Museums. So, for example, every employee of the Carnegie Museums went through a really meaningful racial equity consciousness training, among a lot of other efforts of yours and your team to get these conversations into the bloodstream of our organization. So, thank you for what you are doing, truly. And I will also shout out the work of my colleagues in the anthropology and exhibits departments in particular. The Carnegie and other natural history museums are attempting to move away from a model where anthropology displays are objectifying people to one of co-curation and shared authority. And that's on view, for example, at an exhibit we have up right now called Keeping Traditions Alive, that was made in collaboration with two women from the Quapaw Nation of Oklahoma. And this is really an approach informed by valuing relationships over objects. And I think that's a really important principle to highlight here. And doing the best that we can as staff in the present in trying to care for a collection and a building and exhibits that were not always produced with racial and social justice in mind, but through which these things are possible, even if challenging.
Well, I think you've done a fantastic job in explaining that, Deirdre, and I'm really looking forward to the work that you continue to produce at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. We're really grateful to have you here. So keeping on that theme, I think I'm going to pop over to Deborah for another individual question. Deborah, you represent a different kind of institution, the one with very similar founding history in the local context and similar issues and challenges. Could you share briefly with us some details on legacy of inequity and exclusion within the libraries in particular, as well as what steps are being taken by yourself and colleagues at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh and in the profession in general to address them, and where you see the greatest opportunities and needs?
Sure. Thank you, Gina. One of the things that has been at the forefront of my mind with the recent film, The Librarians, and some challenges around banned books, is this notion that the weaponization of reading is as American as apple pie. And so when we think about the period of enslavement and the way that there were, in essence, life and death penalties for making reading accessible to enslaved persons, and then the use of a reading test as a means of determining if someone could or could not vote. There has always been this sort of use of reading as a means of control, usually of particular kinds of bodies. And so it can be challenging with that sort of history, even when an institution or a building doesn't have a sign that says Blacks only or whites only on it, to extrapolate that deeply embedded and ingrained history. Some colleagues recently shared an article that was in the Post-Gazette, I believe, related to the Braddock Carnegie Library and this sort of unwritten rule that Black children could certainly go in and access books, but they couldn't necessarily stay there and enjoy the books. And so I think even this many years later, when we're so far removed from that history, one of the things that I'm so appreciative of is that colleagues here at Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh prior to me recognize that it's not enough to kind of have all of those very clear, tangible barriers removed, but the patterns of institutions can still remain And so that was part of the recognition that led to the beginning of the IDEA department. We, like the museum, use inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility to encapsulate our commitment to this work. But to say that it's important to have a department that essentially works with the rest of the system or all of the remaining departments to ensure that we are practicing inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And so that really is what has been the focus of my work, is to say that these are practices and that IDEA work is the work of everyone, not just the IDEA department. And to then ensure that even beyond training, that there are departmental equity goals that each department is able to work on, and that we're continuing to ask staff members, what do you need to practice inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility as it relates to your role? And then very specifically to say, where are the times, and when are the times when you've known exactly what you would need to do to practice equity, but you maybe don't have the tools and resources, and how can we resource you to do it? And then where are the times and places where you're facing a situation, you recognize that there's a challenge there where you might like to practice inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, but it's just kind of amorphous and you're not even sure how to approach it. And how can we have some dialogue around that and recognize where the gaps are so that we can continue to build and increase capacity so that across the organization, everyone is able to practice inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility as part of their work. And I think the last thing I would mention is that, again, I cannot take credit for this. Prior to my arrival, we had very robust affinity groups, so identity-based groups that provide that sort of cultural comfort and support for employees. And so I think that's something that we've continued to support and try to grow over the past few years. And so it's both that inward-facing lens in terms of practicing inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, and then an outward-facing lens as well. And then finding the partners that allow us to optimize our impact across our footprint, both in the city and then also with our partners across the county.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And I know you have someone who you really admire in the history of the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh that you and I get to talk about a little bit. Can you share a little bit about your first Black female librarian?
Absolutely. So Dame Vivian Ann Davidson Hewitt was the first Black librarian who served primarily in the Hill District. And every year we hold a lecture in her honor. And so we are excited to have our 2026 lecture coming up. And it actually is going to, our lecturer this year is Dr. Nicole C. Cook, who wrote The Legacy of Black Women in Librarianship. And so we are excited to use that, particularly as a vehicle to create a space where persons, especially young folk, can see themselves having a pathway into librarianship that is shaped by this path that Dame Vivian Ann Davidson Hewitt forged for us here in the city of Pittsburgh.
That's beautiful. I look forward to being there. And you were just speaking my language, and that one-liner, what did you say? That the weaponization of reading is as American as apple pie. I hope some of y'all wrote that down because I did. Thank you for that little piece of knowledge and making that connection for us, because it is true, and we are seeing that right now. Well, I want to get
Gina, you're muted. We can't hear you.
my snap walked in and told me to. All right, so let me start back again. But I was just saying that, Deborah, you are speaking my language. Thank you so much. And I look forward to going to your event, the lecture that is coming up. And also, I hope that you all wrote down that tidbit and that line that Deborah said when she said that the weaponization of reading is as American as apple pie, because I know that I did. And that was a great takeaway for me. But next, I will get into my question for Kimber. Kimber, the August Wilson African American Cultural Center is yet another kind of space within this conversation, one intentionally founded to honor the legacy of Tony Award, Pulitzer Prize winning Pittsburgh native August Wilson, and also to celebrate Black art and culture more broadly. Talk to us a little bit about how you at the August Wilson Center consider your place, especially in your position with curatorial, within this conversation of histories of inequity in institutions of art, culture, and education. And then, for example, maybe you can talk a little bit about our collaborations on the 2023 Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh Call for Art, and how does all of this fit within your mission and initiatives, and how can you continue to expand your work?
Yeah, thank you, Gina. Great. And that's a great question. So, I'll start by saying I'm going to talk, but also read from my notes. I made some notes because I love this question so much, and we talked about it. And as someone who's neurodivergent and talkative, this is important for me. So, from both a personal and institutional perspective, and on the histories of inequity, that's something I know very deeply and intimately, being a Black woman from Mississippi. It was very much instilled, again, in my upbringing and my education at Jackson State University and HBCUs. But also, knowing that, like, I would find these places, I find being at home in cultural institutions and spaces where Blackness and culture is celebrated. And so I've chosen at this stage in my career to mainly focus on Black institutions and being in service to that work, because I also know how institutions can teach us harm as well as care. I learned early that institutions can hold us, they can erase us, but they can also make us feel seen. And that duality is what led me into curatorial work. My background is in art history. I studied history and taught history at Jackson State University as well. I'll add that. So that's what I'm rooted in. And now in this position at the August Wilson African American Cultural Center, like, I knew from the start that, like, this place was founded. I mean, the name itself, it's founded with intention, with the legacy to uphold, and hold space for Black excellence and beauty. And so the center, and I've been here for a little over 3 years. And, witnessing the change in Pittsburgh in that time has been amazing, and getting to know and work with amazing artists has been just such a great part of my experience here in Pittsburgh. And I find that, like, I think the August Wilson Center is my little Black bubble, and I really like it, and I tend to stay in it. But of course, getting out and collaborating and, and doing work in the community also is, exciting and keeps me inspired and going. So, and the center is unique in a sense that, unlike other legacy institutions and large museums that, as Deidre mentioned, are reckoning with these histories of exclusion, the center was founded with a clear purpose. We exist to honor Black life, Black art, and Black ways of knowing. So I think of that, cultural production plus community, people, collaboration is central. So it's not just supplemental, it's central to what we do. So, and to the shared cultural landscape, right? To the city, to Pittsburgh. And so with exhibitions and exhibition making, and I'll get to, like, Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh, because working with you on that, Gina, in 2023 was so special to me. But I know that, in my work, I'm always guided with questions like, where am I? I have moved around a lot in life and in my career, from Richmond, Virginia, to St. Louis, to Memphis, Atlanta, Cape Town, South Africa. So I've lived all over, and I'm learning from the environment that I'm in and the people that I live around, my community, my people that I work with. So I'm always asking, yeah, where am I and who is seen here? Do they feel welcome? Hospitality is so important. The Southern hospitality is real. And so making sure that people feel welcome, comfortable, and at ease. And then, what will they remember? So those are sort of my those are my guiding questions in exhibitions and in my work. So yeah, listening, you know, listening stories is so important. Even the Teenie Harris Archive, shout out to you, Charlene, for that amazing work. Being able to discover more about like Pittsburgh Black history and my family as well through the archive. So that's what, my work here has been, again, grounded and rooted in so far. It's still evolving. And I know that, this is our third year with Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh, and it opens in February. And, and getting to, again, really see the city through the lens of artists directly through the call for art has been so special to me. So I'll add that, yeah, I do believe art is truly transformational. So again, making space for art to be a site of both repair, reflection, I think is key in this work. So I'll say, yeah, I think, I'm sorry, I'm gonna look at my notes because some things, I may be talking too long because I told you I was talkative and long-winded. But yeah, exhibitions are spaces where I think imagination comes to life. Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh is, I think, a practice of collective imagining, thinking about what the city can be, also an act of collective transformation. Like I said, I feel like art is truly transformational, revolutionary in many ways. And so that's, what I am excited to do in community and with Eugenia and in the work with Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh is that it really serves that purpose. And so, yeah, again, the call for art asks artists to respond to equity, community, and belonging, particularly as they relate to Pittsburgh. But this year, I thought it was super special that the call for art positioned museums, libraries, and archives as spaces and sites for inquiry and imagination. So, yeah, and so I'm excited to see it all come together in the exhibition and the showcase, as well as it's because it's not only visual art, right? It's performance, it's writing, it's every way an individual could express themselves, and getting to again look through and see that is just an incredible privilege because I also serve as a juror. So, and it's, again, showcasing it here at the August Wilson Center. This will be our second year. And it definitely fits within my curatorial and ethical framework. And I think, that is a way that we are serving justice. Not always getting it right, but, staying committed, doing the work, being present, and connected to purpose. So, yeah. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, Kimberly. And you've expanded on this work personally with the August Wilson's being / seen juried.
Oh, yeah,
art
that was
exhibit.
totally, yes. And totally inspired by Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh. That was the first open call exhibition that I worked on here. And yeah, I mean, and the response was incredible. Shout out to some amazing community partners and co-curators in that project, but it was really, it was a big show. And yeah, so thank you.
Absolutely. All right. So I want to come back to my friend Charlene. Since 2001, the Carnegie Museum of Art has stewarded the archive of the beloved Charles Teenie Harris, making the Carnegie a home for the preservation, providing a living resource, and sharing of the history of Black life in Pittsburgh in the 20th century. So, Charlene, can you tell us a little bit about what is a community archivist and how does your role fit within this conversation we're having today? What do you see as your greatest opportunity and challenge for advancing racial justice within the Carnegies in your field?
Well, that's a packed question for sure. Um, but and I have to say that it's a privilege to have the work that I do because not only am I working on a collection left to us by an amazing photographer, Charles Tini Harris, and his work not only with the Black newspaper of Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Courier, but also just the legacy information he's left for so many of us. Speaking of Vivian Hewitt, my mom and Vivian were lifelong friends. And then I became a friend of Vivian's because I'm in the Aurora Reading Club as a legacy member. That's a 130-year-old African American women's reading club, which was started to make certain that diversity and culture, theater, plays, going to museums, and reading to students who might not be exposed to as much information as they need. So Vivian was an important part of that. And I will add that being a community archivist means that you have to have your hands in things in the community. So I'm very proud to say that I was in the inaugural, well, I started on committees when the August Wilson Center was started. And then I was in an inaugural play, The Women of the Hill, in 2011, and I have since kept a connection with August Wilson Center. I'm a board member of August Wilson House, but the center has provided opportunities for the Charles Tini Harris to have several installations, and we currently have that in the writer's landscape as well. All that to say this is what I do. This is what my job is to work with the community, especially because I know so much of the community. But let's face it, I'm a different demographic, and my demographic is fizzling out a little bit. So I'm excited to learn from my younger colleagues about how we connect, how we make the Harris information relevant to a younger demographic. And for instance, we just did an exhibition that I co-curated at the Carnegie Museum of Art. I co-curated with the photography curator Dan Lears on Black photojournalism. It just closed Monday, and all of that was to to enhance the work of Charles Tini Harris, not only in Pittsburgh but across this country. In my way of thinking, my work is not just in the city of Pittsburgh. My work goes beyond even the borders of this country. To me, racial justice is all justice is human justice. And that's what I work to do, not just for African American justice, but for all justice. And I think that it's important to state that because a lot of times we, as the Harris Archive, are thought to be pigeonholed in only the Black community of Pittsburgh. The content is about all of Pittsburgh. Obviously, it highlights the Black community of Pittsburgh, but as we affectionately call him, Teeny was everywhere and photographing everything. Photography is proof. Photography is the essence of our lived existence. And as we live in this climate today, we can see that some of that could disappear. But thank God for the preservation of collections like this. And so I fit into this conversation because as my colleagues here on the screen are doing important work in their institutions, I can offer accreditation about formulations of ideas and things that worked in the past, or how someone responded to the challenges that we face again today in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so it's important that we keep this kind of slow but steady pressure on. My greatest opportunities are to connect, and my greatest challenge is to remind everyone that the collection is not just about Black Pittsburghers, as I said, and we have to see the commonality. The time for division, although we're trying to be strength as a community, the time for division is past. We are not going to make it unless we move forward and we help each other move forward. So for me, the best proof is Charles T.D. Harris Archive information. And I'm excited because the museum also offers me so many platforms to present on. I know I have one coming up for our culture and community event on Saturday, February 7th from 11 to 3 at Carnegie Museum of Art. And this is what I love to do because I love to connect directly with people and to talk to them, to learn about them, and to share about Pittsburgh and the Black community through the archive images. So it's a win-win for me. And again, I'm very proud to kind of interface with so many organizations in the city on behalf of the Carnegie.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Your work is so important. I think I heard you say photography is proof. It is the essence of our existence. And that just really sat with me. I think thinking of the historical context of teenie, but also in today's day and age and how photography and videography is being used as proof and the essence of our existence. So thank you for sharing that tidbit. And thank you so much for joining me on February 7th coming up for our first Black History Month celebration that you mentioned that we're hosting at the Carnegie Museum of Art and Natural History from 11 to 3. We will also have community tabling. We are going to honor our winners from Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh for this past year. You will see some performances by them. And you'll also get to experience a step performance in the Hall of Architecture, as well as a drumming and dance performance by Sankofa Village. So we really hope to see you all there. We'll drop a link for that as well. Just had to pitch that out because we're excited to build some momentum about our first Black History celebration. All right, this last question, coming from me at least, is for all of our panelists here today. And we've gathered here as part of the YWCA's monthly action conversations. And the purpose of these sessions is really to inspire action, especially in the support of YWCA's mission to eliminate racism and to empower women. I think we've done some of that already here today with these powerful and impressive women. But drawing from each of your experiences and working to advance racial justice at your institutions, what are some actions that community members can take to honor diverse voices, to repair some of this past harm, and to celebrate community in their own lives and work? And then we can start in the same order that we did initially. And so I will pitch this first to you, Deirdre.
Thank you, Gina. So where my mind goes with this question is to think both about what's possible inside an institution and also what's possible and maybe preferable sometimes outside of an institution. So working to advocate for change in museums, for example, requires speaking up and speaking out, but also being very strategic and very patient a lot of the time. But when it comes specifically to, in your question, right, like celebrating culture and community and diversity, these things do not require and don't always benefit from an institution like a museum. Museums have buildings, museums have access to resources, museums have reputations, but they also move slowly and they can get bogged down and they can involve a lot of negotiation and compromise for all the good that they can also do. And there are so many inspiring examples from the history of art of people who, with a lot of effort and not always a lot of money, take matters into their own hands to put on exhibitions in their homes or other spaces that they have access to, or who self-publish their work and distribute it through social networks, whether that be in person or online. And I don't mean that to sound flippant as someone coming from inside a museum. I think, you can be fast and nimble and have a lot of creative and ethical control in those scenarios in ways that aren't always possible in museums. And then sometimes museum embedded cultural workers will take notice of what's happening in those outside spaces too. And that can create different kinds of opportunities for collaboration across different scales and types of spaces. And as an example from art history, I'll just shout out the work of a woman named Linda Good Bryant, who ran the gallery just above Midtown in New York throughout the 1970s and 1980s. To make space to display the work of particularly experimental, modern, and contemporary Black artists who didn't always get the attention that they deserved at that time. And the Museum of Modern Art in New York put on an exhibition about Bryan and just above Midtown back in 2022. But there's an incredible catalog that you can still access today and that shares both what she was able to achieve, but also the struggles that she faced throughout that time running that gallery. So I really recommend that book and that history as a source of inspiration when thinking about how to advance those goals kind of in your life and in your community in a kind of extra institutional way.
Thank you, Deirdre. And I hope you or someone can drop that book in the chat for all of us. All right. How about we go to Deborah to answer that question as well?
Sure. So I love a good list. So I'm going to share 4 things rather succinctly. The first is prioritizing your own wellness and joy. I think that's key to continuing the work of equity in a sustainable way. The second one, if I can read my own handwriting, I'll skip to the third one. Finding ways to have your own archival resources. So I think both Deirdre and Charlene already pointed to that. Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh does have a recollection studio where you can come in and create digital archives of your own materials. And so, again, it's just important that archives are community controlled. And so that's one way to do that. The other thing I would mention is intentionally increasing one's own literacy. And that points to the one that I forgot, which is finding ways for intergenerational exchange and connection, also already mentioned. But thinking about literacy again broadly, whether it's reading, whether it's financial literacy, digital literacy, increasing those skills, but doing that in an intergenerational way. Those are all ways that we can kind of continue the work of equity in communal spaces, which is also another way of making it sustainable.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And so, Kimberly, can you share a little lasting takeaway for our guests today?
Sure. Wow. So I jotted down some notes on this too. And yeah, the first thing that came up for me essentially is heal. And whatever that looks like for the individual, I think healing is a very personal journey, but when we are brave enough to share that, whether through our art, through our work, through our writing, it can be, again, very, transformational, and help us connect to each other. I think connection, real connection is also key. And, understanding, or how do I say, recognizing that the illusion of separateness that exists among us in society, and to know that we are all connected. I'm a true believer in the collective force of energy, of collective intention. And believe it or not, it does make a real difference, and it can be revolutionary and change lives, change cities, change laws, and change the world. And I think we can be brave enough to own that for ourselves, and taking action, whether it requires, like you said, reading, also, literacy, connecting, and collectives. I think, yeah, Deirdre, what you brought up with regards to Linda Good Bryant, I also think of artist-run collectives that have been revolutionary throughout history. So they make a real difference in institutional change. And there's examples of that. Again, throughout history. So I feel like that might be the my points. Other than I'll stop here, otherwise I'll ramble on. But yeah.
Thank you. I think we all need a reminder to heal. And I think we're all constantly dealing with things in our past and things in present are constantly coming up. So that message is the one that I'm really going to carry with me moving forward. So thank you so much for that, Kimberly. And Charlene, you're our last one before we open up for some audience questions. But what are some actions that community members can take?
I'll try to make this short. Be present. Be present, be supportive, show up, and participate, especially those of us who are working in the arts, and all of us on this panel are. It's important to emphasize how much work we do in the background to present programs, to present events, to have opportunities to share this work. But if people don't come in and participate, it's very heartbreaking when you have a low number in the audience, because this is so important. And so to me, that's the most important message. And another thing I would think of is, especially thinking about Kimberly, when I moved back to Pittsburgh from Los Angeles, people weren't exactly sure who I was because they forgot all about me and all of that, because I was now in my 40s and you know, and 50s. And it was hard to get back in to the community. It was kind of like, well, who's she? And we have to stop doing that. We have, especially in the Black community, especially as Black women, we have got to be more open to our new residents and our new friends. They are bringing information to us and for us from their lived experiences that we need. Because one of the things I remember about coming back was nothing seemed to have changed in 20 some odd years. Of course, I'd visited, but living here, I thought things haven't changed much. And we're not going to survive in this city if we don't open up and allow new ones with new ideas to blend into our rich history.
Thank you so much, Charlene. And just going to kind of try to weave all of the threads between all of your lasting messages. But I think it's really important for folks to realize that we are accessible. We are constantly listening. We are a consistent resource, as Deirdre mentioned, and I believe Deborah. Please look into building your own archives, your own galleries, your own exhibits in spaces that you have access to. Leverage the resources of the Carnegie Museums and the Carnegie Library to help build those archives. And visit the Teeny Archive as well as the August Wilson Center for some lasting inspiration. So thank you all so much for answering those questions. I think we maybe have time for one or two questions in the chat. Let me take a peek. Let's see what we have here. All right, I see one question shot to me, and I'll ask this really quickly, and I may just answer it myself because I have some personal connection to this question. But the question is, what is the best way for a white mother to educate her children about Black culture and teach them about inclusion? The only reason I say this is relative to me is because I was born with a white mother. And this white mother of mine did do a really fantastic job with connecting me to Black culture, but I did have a half a Black family to help with that. But just because someone is a white mother doesn't mean that the community that they're surrounded in and that they have access to reflects that as well. And so there are so many resources like the Teenie Harris Archive and like the August Wilson Cultural Center. And for me in my life, it was really important to have those cultural experiences in the greater community of Pittsburgh and getting out of my own neighborhood to make sure that I had impressions that would last me about historical figures that were important in my immediate region. And so that is my answer. And I don't know if any of our other panelists have something to contribute to the question, but I flip it back to you all.
I'll just say very quickly that on our website, we have evergreen book lists that are related to many of the identity months. And so there are plenty of resources that are available, and some of them are broken down by age range. And so there's lots of resources that can support persons of all identities, either in creating a stronger sense of identity and or learning about other cultures as well.
Does anyone else want to touch that before we have probably 60 seconds left?
I think too that don't shy away from exposing your child to the information. Excuse me. Even if you feel you don't have a real handle on all of it, please engage your child in that. My son wrote a book about being white, being a Black child in mostly white schools and spaces and neighborhoods. And his grad school teacher told him the assignment was to write about your being Black, and he thought he wasn't having a Black experience because he hadn't been as deeply engrossed in the Black community as some others. And she said, "Are you Black?" And he said, "Yes." She says, "Well, then you had a Black experience." So, so I think it's important to meet on the level that your child is and let them embrace it as they are without expectation.
Thank you. That's really beautiful. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists today for this informative and inspiring conversation. And I hope that you take away a desire to visit all of us and in the near future, engage with our institutions. Please remember that the Carnegie Museums have community access memberships and passes for those experiencing financial hardships. You can find out information about that anytime you visit one of our museums. And please join the YWCA again next month on February the 18th for a discussion on Black fatigue. Thank you all and stay bold.
Thanks, y'all. See ya.